The yellow diary page trembled in the winter breeze, its faded ink still legible in the dim candlelight. The Blackwood family shall never have heirs. That is the curse from the war and the price for what we have done. Snow fell in thick, unrelenting sheets across the Montana landscape, blanketing the world in silent white. Through this veil of white stood a solitary figure, a young woman, her face partially obscured by a heavy woolen scarf. In her arms she cradled a small bundle wrapped in blankets, protecting it from the biting cold. The wind howled around her, but she remained steadfast, standing before a snow-covered grave marker. "I once believed fate was set in stone," an elderly woman's voice narrated, "until love broke the curse." The young woman knelt before the grave, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. With reverence, she placed a silver pocket watch atop the headstone, its metal gleaming despite the lack of sunlight. For a moment she remained there, her gloved fingers lingering on the timepiece as if reluctant to part with it. Then, as suddenly as the vision appeared, it faded away like morning mist. Montana Territory, 1885. The vast expanse of untamed land stretched as far as the eye could see, with rolling hills, giving way to the distant snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. Here, where civilization still clung tentatively to the wilderness, the Blackwood Ranch stood as a testament to one man's stubborn refusal to surrender to the elements. Eleanor Blackwood carefully placed another log onto the fire, watching the flames leap higher. At 19, she possessed a quiet strength that belied her years, a necessary quality for survival in this unforgiving land. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, though a few rebellious strands framed a face that combined both delicacy and determination. Her hands, though small, showed the calluses of hard work, yet moved with the precision of someone accustomed to detail. The ranch house creaked and groaned against the autumn wind outside. Eleanor glanced at the window, noting the lengthening shadows. Her father would be returning soon, and experience had taught her to have everything ready when Captain William Blackwood walked through that door. From the shelf above the hearth, a silver pocket watch caught the firelight. Eleanor paused in her work, drawn to it, as she had been countless times before. It had belonged to her mother, the only tangible memory Eleanor had of the woman who had died when she was 10. She reached for it, the metal cool against her palm despite its proximity to the fire. Opening the case, she traced the inscription with her finger. "The truth shall set you free." Words her mother had lived by, according to the few stories her father had shared during his more lucid moments. Eleanor had never fully understood what truth needed freeing, but she treasured the motto nonetheless. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted her reverie. Quickly she returned the watch to its place and resumed her chores, straightening her apron as boots scraped on the porch outside. Captain William Blackwood entered like a gust of cold wind all at once, and filling the room with his presence. Once a commanding figure in the Union Army during the Civil War, he still carried himself with military bearing, despite the slight stoop to his shoulders and the gray streaking his once dark hair. His weather-beaten face bore the lines of a man who had seen too much hardship, and his eyes the same deep blue as Eleanor's held shadows that never quite dissipated. "Evening, Father," Eleanor said, her voice steady. William grunted in acknowledgement, hanging his coat by the door. She could smell the whiskey on him already, though he seemed steadier than most evenings. Not fully drunk then, just started. "Dinner's nearly ready," she continued, turning toward the stove. "Not hungry," he replied, his voice gruff as he moved to his chair by the fire. "Got a letter from the bank today. Mortgage payments coming due." Eleanor's heart sank. The ranch had been struggling for years, caught in the vice of harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, and her father's increasingly poor management. They had already sold off half their land and most of their livestock. "I'll see if Mrs. Peterson needs any more help with laundry," she offered. "Or perhaps Dr. Miller might need assistance with—" "No daughter of mine is going to scrub other people's linens or play nurse." William cut her off, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The Blackwoods have their pride even now." Eleanor bit her tongue. Pride wouldn't feed them or keep the bank at bay. She'd been helping both Mrs. Peterson and Dr. Miller secretly for months, using the money to supplement their dwindling resources. The doctor had even been teaching her rudimentary medicine knowledge she treasured far more than the meager payment. William reached for the bottle he kept by his chair, pouring amber liquid into a glass that had seen cleaner days. "I've made arrangements," he said after a long swallow. "Bought a war horse, thoroughbred with bloodlines back to Kentucky. Cost me nearly everything we had left." Eleanor froze. "Everything but the mortgage." "That horse will be worth 5 times what I paid once I train him," William interrupted, a familiar gleam of desperate hope in his eyes. "Captain's redemption, that's what I'm calling him. He'll turn everything around." Eleanor had heard similar promises before the prize bull that would revolutionize their breeding stock died of illness 3 weeks after purchase. The new agricultural method that would double their yield failed in Montana's harsh climate. The mining shares that would make them rich worthless within a month. Each failure had driven her father deeper into the bottle and further from reality. "Where is this horse now?" she asked, careful to keep judgment from her voice. "Being delivered tomorrow. Special arrangement with a cavalry officer passing through. Edwards, I think his name was." William took another drink. "The horse is spirited, needs a firm hand." Spirited was her father's word for dangerous. Eleanor's concern deepened. "Father, perhaps we should consider other options. The Hendersons mentioned they might need help with their— We are not selling this land." William slammed his glass down, liquid sloshing over the rim. "This is Blackwood land, our legacy." "A legacy requires someone to pass it to," Eleanor said quietly. It was an old argument, one she usually avoided. William's face darkened. "The Blackwood line ends with us, Eleanor. You know that. Because of your imagined curse, Father. That's superstition, not—" "It is not superstition," he roared, suddenly on his feet. The fire cast his shadow large against the wall, a looming specter. "The Blackwood curse is as real as you and me. Our blood is tainted. It must end." In these moments, Eleanor caught glimpses of the battlefield that still raged in her father's mind. The war between the states had ended 20 years ago, but for William Blackwood, some battles never ceased. "Every Blackwood who has tried to extend the family line has been punished," he continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Your grandfather, his brother, my cousins, all of them lost their wives in childbirth. Your mother was the last." Eleanor had heard variations of this story throughout her childhood, how the Blackwoods were cursed during the war, how attempting to continue the bloodline only brought death. It was why her father forbade her from considering marriage, why he drove away any young man who showed interest in the captain's daughter. "Mother died of fever," Eleanor said gently. "Many women did back then. It wasn't a curse." William wasn't listening. He rarely did when the past took hold. "The Gettysburg Oath," he murmured, his eyes distant. "Blood debts must be paid in blood." He sank back into his chair, suddenly looking every one of his 58 years. "No Blackwood will suffer that fate again. The line ends with us." Eleanor moved about the kitchen, finishing dinner preparations, despite his claim of no appetite. Experience had taught her he would eat eventually, the whiskey demanding sustenance to continue its work. As she worked, her mind drifted to the small cache of medical books hidden beneath the loose floorboard in her room. Texts borrowed from Dr. Miller, studied by candlelight when her father was asleep or too drunk to notice. In another life, she might have pursued medicine properly. The thought of healing, rather than simply enduring, gave her a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. Dr. Miller had told her she had a natural talent, steady hands, quick thinking, and most importantly, a genuine desire to ease suffering. The neighboring Cheyenne tribe had even begun to seek her out for minor ailments when venturing into town seemed too risky. Eleanor kept these encounters secret from her father, whose prejudices ran as deep as his battle scars. From them, she had learned about natural remedies that complemented Dr. Miller's more formal teachings. All of it felt like a small rebellion against the confines of her existence, the curse that wasn't a curse at all, but rather a prison of her father's making. Morning brought a commotion to the ranch yard. Eleanor, already up and tending to the few chickens they had left, watched as two men approached on horseback. One led a magnificent black stallion that tossed its head and pranced sideways, fighting the lead rope with every step. The horse was magnificent, 17 hands of pure power, with a gleaming coat and wild eyes that reflected both intelligence and defiance. Eleanor could see why her father had been captivated. Captain's redemption indeed looked the part of savior if one could overlook the danger he clearly presented. William emerged from the house, straightening his posture as he approached the men. For a moment, Eleanor caught a glimpse of the officer he had once been proud, commanding, sure of his place in the world. Captain Blackwood, the older of the two men, greeted, dismounting. Lieutenant Edwards, we spoke in town. William nodded, his attention fixed on the stallion. Fine animal. Finest war horse I've seen since the conflict, Edwards agreed. Trained to respond to battlefield commands, but not broken in spirit. He's got fight in him still. The horse snorted and reared slightly, as if acknowledging the assessment. Papers are all in order, Edwards continued, handing William a folded document. His bloodlines go back to horses that served with distinction at Bull Run. The transaction was completed quickly. Money changed hands, far too much money, Eleanor thought with a sinking heart. And soon the men were riding away, leaving the Blackwoods with their new acquisition. William approached the stallion cautiously, speaking in low tones. The horse eyed him warily, nostrils flaring at the scent of stale whiskey. He'll need a firm hand, William said, more to himself than to Eleanor. Discipline, structure. Eleanor watched as her father attempted to lead the horse to their small stable. Captain's redemption resisted, planting his hooves and tossing his magnificent head. Father, she called, perhaps give him time to settle, new surroundings and all. William shot her an irritated glance. The animal needs to learn who's master from the start. He jerked the lead rope sharply, causing the stallion to rear up in protest. Eleanor moved forward instinctively. Let me try. Before William could object, she was already approaching, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Instead of reaching for the rope, she began to hum softly an old tune her mother used to sing, the battle hymn of the Republic. The horse's ears pricked forward, his wild eyes focusing on her. That's right, she murmured between verses. You know this one, don't you? From the parades, perhaps. Gradually, the stallion calmed his breathing, steadying as Eleanor continued to hum. She didn't reach for him, simply stood nearby, offering presents without demand. Glory, glory, hallelujah, she sang softly, the familiar words carrying on the crisp morning air. His truth is marching on. Captain's redemption lowered his head slightly, blowing out a long breath. The tension in his powerful frame eased fractionally. William watched with a mixture of surprise and something else, perhaps remembered pain. The song had been a favorite of Eleanor's mother as well. He responds to a woman's touch. William observed his voice unusually subdued. Like another soldier I once knew. Eleanor continued humming, gradually moving closer to the horse. When she was within arm's reach, she slowly extended her hand, palm up, offering rather than taking. The stallion hesitated, then stretched his neck to sniff her hand. His warm breath tickled her palm. "See, he just needs patience," Eleanor said, finally daring to stroke the horse's velvet nose. "And respect." William's expression darkened. "What he needs is discipline. You can't gentle a war horse, Eleanor. It goes against their nature." He snatched the lead rope from her hand. "I'll handle him from here." The sudden movement startled Captain's Redemption. The horse reared up, pulling back hard. William, caught off guard, stumbled forward, bringing him directly into the path of flailing hooves. "Father!" Eleanor cried out, lunging forward. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats that seemed to stretch into eternity. Eleanor pushing her father aside, the horse coming down, the sickening sound of impact, pain exploding through her legs, the world tilting as she fell. She lay in the dirt of the ranch yard, the blue Montana sky wheeling overhead. Strangely, the first thought that came to her was how beautiful it looked, vast and endless, promising freedom she'd never known. The pain came in waves, washing over her in hot pulses that stole her breath. Eleanor tried to sit up, but her legs wouldn't respond properly. Looking down, she saw the unnatural angle of her right leg, the torn fabric of her dress revealing skin already purpling with bruises. Her left ankle twisted in a way that immediately told her medical mind it was broken. Captain's Redemption stood nearby, snorting and pawing the ground, the lead rope trailing in the dust. The horse seemed almost apologetic, his earlier fury replaced with nervous agitation. William knelt beside her, his face ashen. For a moment, just a moment, she saw the father he had once been, concern replacing the perpetual anger and disappointment. "Can you stand?" he asked, his voice gruff, but tinged with worry. Eleanor tried again to move her legs, gasping as fresh pain shot through her. I don't think so. My right leg and left ankle, I think they're broken." William's expression shifted, transforming before her eyes. The brief glimpse of fatherly concern vanished, replaced by something cold and distant. He looked from her to the horse, still dragging its lead rope through the dust of the yard. "This is the curse," he whispered, reaching for his flask. "Don't you see? The Blackwood blood continues to pay." "Father, please." Eleanor gasped through the pain. "I need a doctor." William took a long drink, his eyes growing unfocused. "She'll never forgive me," he murmured, seemingly speaking to someone only he could see. "Not for this, too." Eleanor realized with growing horror that he wasn't truly seeing her anymore. The battlefield had claimed him again, pulling him back to whatever nightmare haunted his sleeping and waking hours alike. "The curse takes everything," William continued, his voice hollow. "Everything we love, everything we hope for." "Father," Eleanor's voice sharpened with pain and fear. "Look at me. I'm your daughter, Eleanor. I need help." For a brief moment, clarity returned to William's eyes. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and something like recognition flickered across his weathered features. "Those eyes," he whispered, "just like your mother's." He reached out a trembling hand, almost touching her face before pulling back. "Too much like her." He straightened suddenly, calling for the ranch hand, their last remaining hired help, an older man named Parker, who had stayed out of loyalty rather than promise of payment. "Get her to the road," William instructed, his voice once again, the clipped tone of a military officer. "She can't stay here." Parker looked shocked. "But Captain, she needs a doctor. Town's 15 miles. She can't stay here, William repeated, turning away. The curse follows the Blackwood blood. She'll bring more misfortune if she remains. Eleanor couldn't believe what she was hearing. Father, you can't mean— Do as I say, Parker, William commanded, already walking toward the stallion, gathering the trailing lead rope. Take her to the crossroads. Someone will come along. At least let me take the wagon into town for the doctor, Parker pleaded. William's voice hardened. The wagon stays. We need it for the ranch. Eleanor watched in disbelief as her father led the horse away, his back straight, his gait purposeful, every inch the captain making the difficult but necessary decision. Only this wasn't a battlefield, and she wasn't a strategic sacrifice. She was his daughter. Parker, she called, fighting through the pain. My mother's watch. Please, I can't leave without it. The old ranch hand nodded grimly, disappearing into the house. When he returned, he had not only the silver pocket watch, but also a blanket and a canteen of water. This isn't right, he muttered, as he carefully helped Eleanor onto his old mare. Man's not in his right mind, hasn't been for years. The journey to the crossroads was agony. Each step of the horse sent jolts of pain through Eleanor's broken limbs. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, refusing to cry out. Pride was perhaps the only Blackwood trait she was grateful to have inherited. The crossroads was little more than a weathered signpost, where the main road split, one fork leading to town, the other continuing on to larger settlements further east. Parker helped her down, making her as comfortable as possible against the signpost. I'll ride for the doctor myself, he promised, his rheumy eyes filled with regret. Captain be damned. Eleanor shook her head weakly. He'll discharge you without reference. You need the position. A position's not worth a human life, Parker argued. Please, Eleanor insisted. Just tell Dr. Miller where I am when you next go to town. Father won't let you take the horse now, and on foot. She didn't need to finish the thought. On foot the journey would take hours, and the doctor might not be able to come immediately. Parker reluctantly agreed, his weathered face creased with concern. Someone will come along. He echoed William's words, though, with genuine hope rather than dismissal. This road sees traffic most days. With that cold comfort, he mounted his horse and rode back toward the ranch, glancing over his shoulder until Eleanor was just a small figure huddled against the signpost. Alone at the crossroads, Eleanor tried to take stock of her situation. The pain in her legs had settled into a persistent throb, which her medical knowledge told her was both good and bad. Good, because it meant she wasn't in shock. Bad, because the real agony would come with any attempt to move. She examined her right leg as best she could. The break seemed clean, a small mercy if it was indeed broken, rather than simply badly bruised. Her left ankle was definitely broken, already swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its autumn warmth insufficient against the chill that seemed to have settled in her very bones. Hours passed with no sign of travelers. Eleanor sipped sparingly from the canteen, knowing dehydration would only worsen her condition. As afternoon waned into evening, the reality of her situation became increasingly dire. Night in Montana came with bitter cold, even in early autumn. Without shelter, she might survive until morning, but her chances diminished with each passing hour. The irony wasn't lost on her that after years of her father's insistence on the Blackwood curse, she might indeed die because of his belief in it. A self-fulfilling prophecy of the cruelest kind. Eleanor clutched the silver pocket watch, its familiar weight offering small comfort. The truth shall set you free, she whispered, tracing the inscription. What truth? The truth that her father had finally abandoned her completely. The truth that the Blackwood name would indeed end with them, not because of a curse, but because of one man's broken mind. Twilight painted the sky in spectacular hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to what might be her final hours. Eleanor found herself humming again, the battle hymn of the Republic, the song that had momentarily calmed Captain's redemption before disaster struck. "Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord," she sang softly, her voice growing weaker as the cold seeped deeper. "He is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored." The sound of barking cut through her fading consciousness. Eleanor forced her eyes open, unsure when they had closed. Through the gathering darkness, she made out a shape moving rapidly toward her, a dog large and swift. "Hello," she called, her voice barely above a whisper. The dog reached her, a magnificent German shepherd with intelligent eyes and an air of purpose. He circled her once, sniffing intently, then let out a series of sharp barks that seemed almost conversational in their rhythm. "I'm afraid I'm not much company," Eleanor told the dog, managing a weak smile. "Though you're a sight more welcome than the coyotes I was expecting." The dog cocked his head, then suddenly darted forward and gently tugged at her shawl with his teeth. "What are you?" Eleanor began, but the dog had already pulled the garment free and was racing away with it. "Wait, please, I need that." But the animal was gone, disappearing into the gathering darkness with her only extra layer of warmth. Eleanor leaned back against the signpost, a tear finally escaping to track down her cheek. Even a dog had abandoned her. The cold grew more intense as true darkness fell. Eleanor's thoughts became sluggish, her body occasionally jerking with violent shivers. She knew these were dangerous signs, hypothermia setting in. Without intervention, she wouldn't see the morning. She clutched the pocket watch tighter, focusing on the inscription as if it might somehow save her. "The truth shall set you free." She repeated the words, slurring slightly. "The truth." The distant sound of hoofbeats penetrated her fading awareness. Eleanor struggled to lift her head, straining to see through the darkness. A lantern bobbed in the distance, growing larger as it approached. "Hello?" she called, her voice stronger with renewed hope. "Please help." The horse and rider materialized from the darkness like apparitions. The rider dismounted quickly, lantern held high to illuminate the scene. Eleanor blinked against the sudden light, making out the figure of a tall man in a long coat. Behind him trotted the German shepherd, looking quite pleased with himself. "Good God!" the man exclaimed, kneeling beside her. "What happened? Who left you out here?" His voice was deep and cultured, with the slightest hint of a southern accent carefully smoothed away. As he moved the lantern closer, Eleanor saw a face that spoke of both kindness and hardship, lined with experience, framed by salt and pepper hair, and dominated by eyes that assessed her condition with professional detachment. "My leg, ankle, horse accident." Eleanor managed her teeth, chattering. The man nodded, already removing his coat to wrap around her. "I'm Dr. Jackson Montgomery," he said, his hands moving with practiced efficiency as he checked her pulse. "And you've already met Valor, it seems." The dog Valor sat nearby, watching the proceedings with evident satisfaction. "He took my shawl," Eleanor said, her mind still foggy with cold and pain. Dr. Montgomery smiled slightly. "He's trained to bring me items with human scent when he finds someone injured. War dog," he explained briefly. "Best nose in 3 territories." His hands moved to examine her legs, his touch professional but gentle. "These need proper attention. I'm going to have to move you, and it will hurt. I apologize in advance." Eleanor nodded, bracing herself. True to his word, the pain was excruciating as he lifted her onto his horse. She bit back a scream, tasting blood again from her already abused lip. "My practice is about 2 miles from here," Dr. Montgomery said, mounting behind her and securing her against his chest. "Can you hold on that long?" "Yes," Eleanor whispered, though she wasn't at all certain. They rode slowly, the doctor careful to minimize jostling. Valor trotted alongside, occasionally looking up as if checking on their progress. "What's your name?" Dr. Montgomery asked, his voice close to her ear. "Eleanor," she replied, finding it increasingly difficult to stay conscious. "Eleanor Blackwood." She felt him stiffen slightly behind her. "Blackwood, Captain William Blackwood's daughter. You know my father." The question came automatically, though the answer hardly mattered now. There was a pause before the doctor replied. "I knew many men during the war," he said finally. "The name is familiar." Eleanor wanted to ask more, but the combination of pain, cold, and exhaustion overwhelmed her. The last thing she remembered was the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, and the strange comfort of being held securely by a complete stranger who somehow felt familiar. Consciousness returned, gradually filtering through layers of disorientation. Eleanor became aware of sensations one by one, warmth enveloping her body, the softness of clean bedding, the dull ache in her legs, the crackling of a nearby fire. She opened her eyes to find herself in a simply furnished but comfortable bedroom. A fire burned cheerfully in a small hearth, casting dancing shadows across wooden walls adorned with bookshelves. Through a window she could see it was daylight, though whether it was the next day or several days later, she couldn't tell. Attempting to sit up proved immediately unwise. Pain shot through her right leg, causing her to gasp aloud. "I wouldn't recommend that just yet," came a deep voice from the doorway. Dr. Montgomery entered carrying a tray. He looked different in daylight, still imposing at well over 6 feet, but less severe. His face showed kindness that had been hidden in the darkness, though the assessment in his eyes remained clinical as he observed her. "Your right tibia is fractured, though, thankfully not compound, and your left ankle is badly broken," he explained, setting the tray on a nearby table. "I've set both as best I can, but you'll need to remain immobile for several weeks." Eleanor glanced down to find both legs splinted and bandaged. "Thank you," she said, her voice hoarse, "for finding me, for helping." Dr. Montgomery poured water from a pitcher and helped her drink. "Thank Valor," he replied. "He's the one who found you. I was simply following my dog." As if summoned, the German shepherd appeared in the doorway, tail wagging slightly at the sight of Eleanor awake. He approached the bed cautiously, sniffing in her direction. "He's been checking on you regularly," the doctor said, a note of fondness in his voice. "Seems to have appointed himself your guardian." Eleanor managed a small smile, extending her hand toward the dog. Valor sniffed it thoroughly, then gave her fingers a gentle lick before settling on the floor beside the bed. "How long have I been here?" she asked. 3 days. Dr. Montgomery answered, his expression growing serious. "You were in and out of consciousness with fever the first night. I was concerned about infection, but you've responded well to treatment." 3 days. Eleanor wondered if her father had even noticed her absence, or if he had simply accepted it as the natural consequence of his actions, the curse claiming another Blackwood. "I should send word to your father," the doctor continued, studying her face carefully. "I'm sure he's concerned." Eleanor looked away. "He's the one who sent me to the crossroads." There was a long silence. When Dr. Montgomery spoke again, his voice held a carefully controlled anger. "He abandoned you there with these injuries. He believes our family is cursed. Eleanor explained the words sounding hollow even to her own ears. That misfortune follows Blackwood blood. My injury was confirmation in his mind. The doctor's expression darkened further. I've seen many things attributed to curses that were simply the consequences of men's actions, he said quietly, or their failings. Eleanor couldn't argue with that assessment. Exhaustion pulled at her again, the brief conversation draining what little energy she had regained. Dr. Montgomery noticed immediately. Rest now, he said, his tone softening. We can discuss your situation when you're stronger. As Eleanor drifted back to sleep, she realized she still held her mother's pocket watch clutched in her hand. Somehow, through everything, she had not let it go. The next few days passed in a haze of sleep pain and gradual healing. Dr. Montgomery, who asked her to call him Jackson when she was strong enough for longer conversations, proved to be an attentive physician and surprisingly engaging company. His home, she learned, was not just a doctor's practice, but a small ranch of its own with a few cattle, 2 horses, and a large garden that provided most of his food. He lived alone, save for Valor, though his reputation as a skilled physician meant regular visitors seeking treatment. I usually practice in town 3 days a week, he explained one morning as he changed her bandages. The rest of the time, people come to me if needed. How long have you been in Montana? Eleanor asked, wincing slightly as he examined her ankle. 5 years, he replied. Before that, I was in Colorado, and before that, he paused. Various places. I served as an army surgeon during the war. Eleanor watched his face, noting how it closed off slightly at the mention of the conflict. Like her father, Jackson Montgomery carried the war with him, though he seemed to bear the weight differently. The swelling is improving, he noted, efficiently changing the subject as he rewrapped her ankle. You're healing well. Thanks to your care, Eleanor said. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since arriving. Why did you help me, take me in like this? Jackson looked surprised. You needed help. What else would I have done? Many would have taken me to town, left me with the local doctor or a boarding house. He was quiet for a moment, his hands continuing their work. Perhaps I recognized a kindred spirit, he finally said. Someone who needed peace and healing, not just for the body. Before Eleanor could respond, Valor barked from outside, signaling an arrival. Jackson finished securing the bandage and stood. That will be Grace Sullivan, he explained. She helps me with patients, sometimes particularly women. I thought you might appreciate a female presence. Minutes later, Eleanor was introduced to one of the most remarkable women she had ever met. Grace Sullivan was 75 if she was a day, with silver hair pulled into a neat bun and bright, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Despite her age, she moved with the energy of a much younger woman, her hands steady and sure as she helped Eleanor into a fresh nightgown. Jackson's a fine doctor, Grace confided as she brushed Eleanor's hair. But there are some comforts only another woman can provide. How are you feeling truly? Better, Eleanor answered honestly. Though I worry about imposing on Dr. Montgomery's hospitality. Grace made a dismissive sound. That man has more room in this house than he knows what to do with. Been trying to get him to take on an apprentice for years, but he's stubborn as they come. Were you a nurse? Eleanor asked, noting the professional way Grace examined her splints. During the war, yes, Grace confirmed. That's how I met Jackson. We served in the same field hospital at Gettysburg. Eleanor stiffened at the mention of the infamous battle. Gettysburg. Grace nodded, her hands pausing in their work. Worst days of the war those were. So many young men lost. She studied Eleanor's face. That name means something to you. Eleanor hesitated, then said, "My father sometimes mentions the Gettysburg Oath when he's not himself. I never understood what he meant." A shadow passed over Grace's features. "Many oaths were made on that battlefield," she said quietly. "Some kept, some broken. War makes men promise things they can't always deliver." Before Eleanor could press further, Jackson returned with a tray of food. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, but Eleanor filed away Grace's reaction for future consideration. As the days turned into a week, then too Eleanor's strength gradually returned. Though still confined to bed, she began to chafe at her inactivity. Jackson noticed her restlessness and began bringing her books from his extensive library, medical texts, classics, and volumes of poetry. "You have quite the collection," Eleanor commented as he delivered yet another stack of books. "Reading keeps the mind sharp," he replied with a small smile, "and provides company when people are scarce." Eleanor selected a medical text on bone setting. "Dr. Miller, our local physician, let me borrow some of his books," she confessed. "I've always been interested in medicine." Instead of the dismissive response such an admission usually garnered, Jackson looked intrigued. "You've studied informally. Dr. Miller taught me some basics when I helped in his office." Jackson considered this, then said, "If you're interested, I could continue your education while you recover. It would give you something productive to do." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise or her delight. "You would teach me, even though I'm a woman?" "Some of the finest medical minds I've known belong to women," Jackson replied. "Grace among them. Gender has little to do with healing ability." From that day forward, Eleanor's recovery took on new purpose. Each morning, Jackson would leave her with a different medical text and questions to consider. In the afternoons, they would discuss what she had read with Jackson, filling gaps in her knowledge and challenging her understanding. In the evenings, after his rounds were complete, they often sat by the fire while Jackson read aloud, sometimes medical journals, sometimes Shakespeare or Dickens. Valor invariably lay at Eleanor's feet, his steady presence a comfort she had come to rely on. It was during one such evening, nearly 3 weeks after her rescue, that Eleanor finally asked the question that had been growing in her mind. "Why did you leave traditional medicine? Grace mentioned you were renowned during the war." Jackson's reading trailed off his finger, marking his place in the book. For a long moment he stared into the fire, his expression unreadable. "I lost too many," he finally said, his voice low. "Not just patients, that's inevitable in medicine, but people I should have been able to save. People who trusted me." Eleanor remained silent, sensing there was more if she didn't interrupt. "After the war, I practiced in Boston for a time," he continued. "Had a promising career ahead. Then influenza swept through in '69. My wife Charlotte and our 2 children fell ill." His hand tightened on the book. "I couldn't save them. The great Dr. Montgomery, who had saved countless soldiers on the battlefield, couldn't save his own family." "I'm so sorry," Eleanor whispered. Jackson closed the book entirely. "After that, I couldn't bear the city anymore. Too many memories. Too many people looking to me for miracles I couldn't perform." He gestured to the room around them. "So I came west, found a place where expectations were lower and the air was clearer." "But you still practice," Eleanor observed. "I still heal when I can," he corrected. "But I no longer pretend to hold life and death in my hands. That's God's domain, not mine." The confession hung in the air between them, intimate in a way that made Eleanor aware of how much had changed in these few weeks. She was no longer simply a patient to this man, nor was he merely her doctor. Something deeper had formed, a connection born of shared suffering and mutual respect. The war took something from all of us, she said softly. My father's mind, your family, so many lives. Jackson studied her face in the firelight. Your father, his condition, it's what they call soldier's heart now, the battlefield that follows a man home. Eleanor nodded. He has episodes, especially when he drinks, which is most days. He sees things that aren't there, relives battles long over. And this curse he believes in. It started after my mother died, Eleanor explained. He became convinced that the Blackwood line was cursed during the war, that any attempt to continue the family would end in tragedy. She twisted the silver pocket watch in her hands. It's why he forbade me from considering marriage, why he drove away any suitor. The Blackwood line ends with us. He's said it so many times I can hear it in my dreams. Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful. Many men create narratives to explain their suffering, he finally said. It's easier to blame a curse than to accept that life is simply cruel sometimes without reason or purpose. Is that what you believe? Eleanor asked. That there's no purpose to suffering. I believe. Jackson paused, considering his words carefully. I believe that meaning is what we create from our suffering, not something inherent in the pain itself. Their conversation was interrupted by Valor suddenly lifting his head, ears perked toward the window. A moment later, the dog was on his feet, moving toward the door with purpose. Someone's coming, Jackson said, rising from his chair. Unusual at this hour. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease. Few people ventured out after dark in Montana territory unless the need was urgent. Jackson lit a lantern and moved to the front door, Valor at his heels. Eleanor heard muffled voices, then footsteps approaching her room. You have a visitor, Jackson announced, his expression carefully neutral. Says he's your father's ranch hand. Parker appeared behind him, hat in hand, looking considerably more worn than when Eleanor had last seen him. Miss Blackwood, he said, obvious relief in his voice. Thank the Lord you're alive. When I finally got to town and heard Dr. Miller hadn't seen you. I'm recovering well, Eleanor assured him. Dr. Montgomery has been very kind. Parker nodded gratefully toward Jackson. The whole town's been talking about it. Captain's girl rescued by the mountain doctor. He twisted his hat nervously. I've come with news, Miss Eleanor, about your father. Eleanor's heart quickened. Is he all right? He's sober, miss. For the first time in years. Parker looked uncomfortable. After what happened, he locked himself in the house for days. When he came out, he'd destroyed every bottle on the property. He's asking for you, Parker continued. Says he needs to make amends, that he's seen the error of his ways. Eleanor didn't know how to respond. After everything that had happened, the years of neglect culminating in her abandonment at the crossroads, could she simply forgive? Should she? What about Captain's redemption? She asked instead. Sold, Parker replied. For less than half what the captain paid, but enough to make the mortgage payment. He's trying, Miss Eleanor. Truly, he is. Jackson, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. Miss Blackwood is in no condition to travel, he said firmly. Her injuries require at least another month of recovery. I understand, Doctor, Parker said quickly. I'm not suggesting she return now. Just, perhaps the captain could make his apologies in person. Eleanor looked to Jackson, uncertain. It was his home, after all. That decision is Miss Blackwood's to make. Jackson said, his tone making it clear that he would support whatever she chose. Eleanor thought of her father, the hero he had once been, the broken man he had become. Despite everything, he was still her father, still family. Tell him he may visit, she said finally, in 3 days' time. After Parker left, a heavy silence fell between Eleanor and Jackson. He moved about the room, adjusting her blankets and checking her splints tasks that didn't truly need doing. You don't approve, Eleanor observed. Jackson paused, his hands stilling on her blanket. It's not my place to approve or disapprove, he said carefully. But I would be remiss as your physician if I didn't express concern about anything that might impede your recovery. Including emotional distress, Eleanor finished for him, especially that. He straightened, his expression softening. The body and mind heal together, Eleanor. One cannot truly mend while the other remains wounded. Eleanor turned the pocket watch over in her hands, feeling its familiar weight. The truth shall set you free, she murmured, tracing the inscription. Your mother's words, Jackson asked. Eleanor nodded. I've been carrying this truth, this anger and hurt for so long. Perhaps it's time to set it free one way or another. Jackson regarded her with something like admiration. You have a healer's wisdom, he said softly, and more courage than many soldiers I've known. Their eyes met, and in that moment something shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing beneath the surface of their daily interactions. Eleanor felt her breath catch at the intensity of his gaze. Before either could speak, Valor whined softly, breaking the spell. Jackson cleared his throat and moved toward the door. You should rest, he said, his professional demeanor returning. Tomorrow we'll continue your lessons. Good night, Dr. Montgomery, Eleanor replied suddenly, conscious of the impropriety of their situation, a young unmarried woman staying in the home of a bachelor regardless of the medical necessity. Good night, Miss Blackwood, he answered formally, though his eyes still held warmth as he closed the door behind him. Alone in the flickering firelight, Eleanor clutched the pocket watch to her chest and wondered what truths the coming days would reveal and what freedom might lie on the other side of them. The morning of William Blackwood's visit dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn day that showcased Montana's rugged beauty to perfection. Golden light spilled through the window of Eleanor's room, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny stars. For the first time since her injury, Eleanor was dressed in proper clothing, a simple blue dress that Grace Sullivan had altered to accommodate her splinted legs. Her hair was neatly braided, and she sat propped up in a chair rather than lying in bed, determined to meet her father on more equal footing despite her physical limitations. Jackson had been uncharacteristically quiet during their morning routine, his movements efficient but lacking their usual easy rapport. Eleanor sensed his concern, though he voiced no further objections to the visit. Your father will be here around noon, he said, adjusting the pillow behind her back. I'll make myself scarce, give you privacy for your conversation. That's not necessary, Eleanor replied, quickly surprising herself with her reluctance to face William alone. In fact, I'd prefer if you stayed. Jackson paused, studying her face. Are you certain family matters can be complicated? Yes, she said firmly. You've earned the right to be present after everything you've done for me. Something flashed in his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or understanding. He nodded once. As you wish. Valor, sensing the tension in the room, padded over to sit beside Eleanor's chair, resting his head on her lap. She stroked his ears absently, drawing comfort from his solid presence. What will you say to him? Jackson asked quietly. Eleanor had been pondering this question for 3 days, turning it over in her mind during quiet moments between their lessons and conversations. What could be said to a man who had abandoned his injured daughter at a crossroads? What words could possibly bridge such a chasm? I don't know, she admitted. Part of me wants to demand answers why he left me there, why he's believed in this curse for so long. Another part just wants to understand him to find the father I remember from childhood before the war, and drink took him away. Jackson moved to the window, gazing out at the landscape. Understanding doesn't necessitate forgiveness, he said. You can comprehend a man's actions without absolving him of responsibility for them. Is that what you did? Eleanor asked. With the patients you couldn't save. He turned to face her, surprise evident in his expression. What makes you ask that? You said you lost people you should have been able to save, yet you continue to practice medicine in your way. You must have found some peace with those losses. Jackson's mouth curved in a sad smile. Perhaps I'm still searching for that peace. Before Eleanor could respond, Valor lifted his head sharply, ears pricked toward the door. A moment later, the distant sound of hoofbeats reached them. He's early, Jackson observed, moving to help Eleanor adjust her position. Their hands brushed briefly, and despite the circumstances, Eleanor felt a flutter of awareness at the contact. Remember, Jackson said softly, you're in control of this conversation. If at any point you feel overwhelmed or wish to end it, just say the word. Eleanor nodded gratefully, squaring her shoulders as the sound of a horse approaching grew louder. Valor remained by her side, his posture alert but calm. The knock, when it came, was hesitant, so unlike the commanding presence William Blackwood had once projected. Jackson moved to answer it, his tall frame blocking Eleanor's view of the doorway momentarily. Captain Blackwood, she heard him say, his tone neutral but polite. Please come in. Dr. Montgomery. Her father's voice sounded rough as if unused. Thank you for receiving me. The two men entered the room, and Eleanor found herself momentarily speechless at the change in her father. In just weeks, William Blackwood seemed to have aged years. His face was gaunt, his uniform, for he wore his old captain's coat hanging loosely on his frame. His hair and beard, always somewhat unkempt, had been trimmed and combed in an obvious effort at respectability. But it was his eyes that showed the most dramatic transformation, clear and present, without the whiskey haze that had clouded them for as long as Eleanor could remember. Eleanor, William said, his voice barely above a whisper. My girl. Father, she replied, her own voice steady, despite the turmoil of emotions his appearance evoked. William stood awkwardly just inside the doorway, hat clutched in hands that trembled slightly. He glanced at Valor, who watched him warily, then back to Eleanor. Your legs, he began. Are they healing? Jackson supplied when William faltered. With proper care and time she should recover fully, though the right leg may always bear some weakness. William nodded jerkily. Good. That's good. He took a hesitant step forward. May I sit? Eleanor gestured to the chair Jackson had placed opposite her own. William sank into it gratefully, perching on the edge, as if afraid to make himself comfortable. An uncomfortable silence fell. Eleanor found herself studying her father, as if he were a stranger. In many ways he was. The man before her bore little resemblance to either the stern taskmaster of recent years or the affectionate father of her early childhood. I've been sober 22 days, William finally said, the words emerging in a rush. Since the accident. I'm glad to hear it, Eleanor replied, unsure what else to say. William looked down at his hands. I've come to apologize. He continued, each word seemingly dragged from some deep well of remorse. What I did was unforgivable, leaving you there injured. His voice broke. I was not in my right mind. Haven't been for many years. The curse, Eleanor said quietly. William's head jerked up, pain etched in every line of his face. I believed in it so completely, he whispered. The Blackwood curse. the punishment for what I'd done. And now, Eleanor prompted when he fell silent again, now I see it for what it was, a way to explain my suffering without confronting my guilt. He glanced at Jackson, then back to Eleanor. Dr. Miller has been helping me. He calls it a delusion born of the war and grief. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude toward the town doctor who had been her first medical mentor. She had not known he was treating her father. You mentioned guilt, she said. Guilt for what? William's hands tightened on his hat knuckles, whitening. It's a long story, Eleanor, one I'm not proud of. I have time, she replied, and I think I deserve to know. Her father nodded slowly. Yes, you do. He drew a deep breath. It begins at Gettysburg, as so many things do. Jackson, who had been standing unobtrusively near the window, shifted slightly at the mention of the infamous battle. Eleanor noticed his sudden tension but kept her focus on her father. I was a lieutenant then, William began, his gaze distant, leading a company with my twin brother Matthew. We were inseparable, Matt and I. Joined up together, rose through the ranks together. He was the better man, kinder, smarter, more natural leader. I was always in his shadow, but I didn't mind. That's how it had always been. Eleanor had heard of Uncle Matthew only in passing references over the years, a name mentioned in William's drunken ramblings, a ghost that haunted the edges of their lives. The second day at Gettysburg, we were holding a position near Little Round Top, William continued. The fighting was... He shook his head, words failing him momentarily. Hell on earth doesn't begin to describe it. We were being overrun, taking heavy casualties. His voice grew stronger as he retreated into memory, the military officer momentarily replacing the broken man. Matthew was hit badly wounded. At the same time, our right flank was collapsing. If it fell, we'd lose dozens of men, maybe the entire position. William looked directly at Eleanor, his eyes pleading for understanding. I had to make a choice: stay with my brother, try to get him to the field hospital, or rally the men and hold the line. I chose the line. His voice dropped to a whisper. I left my own brother bleeding on the field while I led the charge. The room was silent save for the crackling of the fire. Eleanor found herself holding her breath, sensing there was more to the story. We held the position, William continued after a moment. By the time I could send men back for Matthew, it was nearly dark. They found him somehow still alive and got him to a field hospital. He swallowed hard. I couldn't leave my men, not with the fighting still hot. By the time I reached the hospital the next morning, he was gone. I'm sorry, Father, Eleanor said softly. Losing your brother must have been devastating. William's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The surgeon told me Matthew had asked for me repeatedly before he died. His last words were, "Tell Will I understand. Tell him I forgive him." A single tear tracked down his weathered cheek. But I couldn't forgive myself. I still can't. You were an officer with responsibilities, Eleanor pointed out gently. Uncle Matthew understood that. Yes, but it was more than that, William replied, his voice ragged. The night before the battle, Matthew and I made a pact, a blood oath, as dramatic young men in war often do. We swore to protect each other above all else, to never leave the other behind. He gave a bitter laugh. We used my pocket knife, cut our palms, clasped hands like boys playing at brotherhood when we already shared blood from birth. Eleanor glanced at Jackson, who stood utterly still, his face impassive yet somehow strained. His eyes met hers briefly, then slid away. The Gettysburg Oath, Eleanor murmured, pieces beginning to fall into place. William nodded. I broke it the very next day. I chose duty over blood. After the war, when your mother died in childbirth, just like Matthew's wife had years earlier, I became convinced it was punishment, that the Blackwood line was cursed because I had broken my oath, abandoned my brother. So you abandoned me, Eleanor said, unable to keep a trace of bitterness from her voice. Continuing the cycle. William flinched as if struck. Yes, he whispered. God help me, yes. In my twisted thinking, I believed I was protecting you by pushing you away, that the curse would claim you too if I allowed myself to love you as I should. He leaned forward, anguish plain on his face. Eleanor, I have failed you in every way a father can fail a child. I cannot ask for forgiveness I don't deserve. I can only offer you my deepest remorse and the promise that I am trying to become a man worthy of being your father again. Eleanor felt tears welling in her own eyes. The raw honesty of his confession disarmed her anger, leaving behind a complicated tangle of emotions she couldn't yet unravel. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Part of me wants to forgive you immediately. Another part isn't ready. William nodded, accepting this. I understand. I've come not to demand forgiveness, but to offer truth. You deserve that much at least. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch. I've also brought something that belongs to you. He held it out, and Eleanor recognized it immediately, her mother's wedding ring which William had kept locked away since her death. Your mother would want you to have this, he said. She always said you were the best of both of us, her gentleness and my determination. She was right. Eleanor accepted the pouch, emotion tightening her throat. Thank you. William stood clearly preparing to take his leave. Dr. Montgomery has informed me you'll need at least another month of recovery. I won't intrude on his hospitality or your healing, but I would very much like to visit again, if you're amenable. Eleanor looked to Jackson, who gave a slight nod. That would be acceptable, she said. Perhaps in a week's time. William bowed slightly, the military man showing through his broken exterior. Thank you for seeing me, he said formally. And thank you, Dr. Montgomery, for saving my daughter when I failed to do so. He turned to leave, then paused. One last thing, Eleanor. The ranch, I've put it up for sale. Too many ghosts there, too many bad memories. It's time for a fresh start for both of us. With that, he departed, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Jackson followed to see him out, leaving Eleanor alone with her thoughts and the weight of her father's confession. When Jackson returned, his face was troubled. Are you all right? He asked, kneeling beside her chair. Eleanor realized she was still clutching the leather pouch, her knuckles white with tension. I think so, she said, her voice unsteady. It was not what I expected. Jackson nodded, rising to pour her a glass of water. Family reconciliations rarely are. Something in his tone caught Eleanor's attention. You seem disturbed, she observed. Was it the mention of Gettysburg? A shadow passed over Jackson's face. Many difficult memories there, he said evasively. Eleanor studied him, noticing how he avoided meeting her eyes directly. You were there, weren't you, as a surgeon? Yes. The word emerged clipped and final, clearly closing the subject. Eleanor let it pass, sensing his discomfort. She opened the leather pouch instead, tipping her mother's ring into her palm. It was a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing ostentatious, but well-crafted and obviously cherished. She had small hands like yours, Jackson observed, seemingly grateful for the change in focus. You never knew my mother, Eleanor said without thinking. Jackson stilled his expression, momentarily unguarded. I meant, it's a delicate ring suited to delicate hands. Eleanor frowned slightly, but before she could pursue this odd exchange, Valor whined and pawed at the door. He needs his afternoon walk, Jackson said, relief evident in his voice. Will you be all right on your own for a while? I think some solitude might be beneficial after such an emotional encounter. Eleanor nodded, suddenly feeling the exhaustion that often followed intense emotional experiences. Yes, I think I'd like to rest. Jackson helped her back to bed, his hands gentle and professional. As he was about to leave, Eleanor caught his wrist. Thank you, she said, for being here, for allowing this reconciliation to begin. His expression softened. You're welcome, Eleanor. Rest now. After he left, Eleanor lay back against the pillows, turning her mother's ring over in her fingers. So many revelations in one day, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that more remained hidden. The way Jackson had reacted to her father's story, his strange comment about her mother's hands, something wasn't quite adding up. She placed the ring carefully on the bedside table and picked up her mother's pocket watch instead. The truth shall set you free, she murmured, tracing the familiar inscription. What truth remained to be discovered? In the days following William's visit, Eleanor noticed a subtle change in Jackson. He remained attentive to her medical needs and continued their lessons, but a new reserve had crept into his manner. Where before they had enjoyed easy conversation that often stretched late into the evening, now he seemed to withdraw once her medical care was complete, citing work that needed his attention. Eleanor missed their talks. In the week she had spent recovering under his roof, Jackson Montgomery had become more than her physician. He had become her friend, her teacher, and she was beginning to acknowledge something more. The attraction she felt toward him had grown gradually, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared interests rather than mere physical appeal, though she certainly found him handsome in a weathered, dignified way. Whether he felt similarly was harder to discern, especially with this new distance between them. There had been moments, lingering glances, and occasional touch that lasted longer than strictly necessary, but Jackson was unfailingly proper, never overstepping the boundaries of their doctor-patient relationship. A week after William's first visit, Grace Sullivan arrived for her regular call. The older woman had become a welcome presence in Eleanor's recovery, bringing gossip from town and providing feminine companionship that Eleanor hadn't realized how much she'd missed. Today, Grace brought a basket of freshly baked bread and late-season berries, their sweet scent filling the room as she arranged them on a plate. Jackson tells me you're making excellent progress, Grace said, her bright eyes assessing Eleanor with professional interest. He believes you'll be able to start bearing weight on the left ankle soon. He mentioned that, Eleanor replied, accepting a slice of bread topped with berries. Though he's been rather preoccupied lately. Grace's shrewd gaze sharpened. Has he now? Since when? Since my father's visit, Eleanor admitted. Something about their meeting seemed to trouble him, though he won't speak of it. Grace settled into the chair beside the bed, smoothing her skirts. Men and their secrets, she said with a small sigh. Like stones they carry in their pockets, weighing them down year after year. You know something, Eleanor observed, recognizing the look in the older woman's eyes. Grace studied her for a long moment. I know many things, child. The question is whether it's my place to share them. Eleanor set aside her plate. If it concerns me or my father, I believe I have a right to know. Perhaps, Grace conceded. Though sometimes truth comes at a high price. She leaned forward slightly. What has Jackson told you about his time during the war? Very little, Eleanor admitted. I know he was a surgeon, that he served at Gettysburg among other battles. He mentioned losing patients he should have been able to save, but little beyond that. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Jackson Montgomery was not just any surgeon. He was considered something of a miracle worker, had a way with the knife that saved limbs others would have amputated without thought. Men prayed to be brought to his table if they were wounded. Eleanor absorbed this thinking of Jackson's skilled hands and methodical approach to medicine. It made sense that he had been exceptional even then. "My father was at Gettysburg, too," she said. "He told me about his brother, my Uncle Matthew, dying there." Something flickered in Grace's eyes, confirmation perhaps, or recognition. Did he now? And what did he say about that? Eleanor recounted William's story, the blood oath, the impossible choice, the burden of guilt he had carried since. When she finished, Grace was silent for a long moment, her fingers absently pleating the fabric of her skirt. "Your father told you part of the truth," she finally said, "but not all of it." Eleanor's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" "I was assigned to the field hospital at Gettysburg." Grace began, her voice taking on the quality of one revisiting long-buried memories. "The wounded came in waves, so many young men broken and bleeding. Jackson worked for 3 days straight, barely stopping to eat or drink." She paused, lost in recollection. Late on the second day, they brought in 2 officers, a lieutenant and a captain, both from the same Union regiment. The lieutenant was in bad shape, chest wound, severe blood loss. The captain had a leg wound, painful, but not immediately life-threatening. "My father and uncle," Eleanor whispered. Grace nodded. "Matthew and William Blackwood. You favor your uncle, actually, something in the eyes." Eleanor tried to picture the uncle she'd never known, the man whose death had shaped her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. "Jackson was called to attend Matthew immediately," Grace continued. "The wound was grave, but if anyone could save him, it was Jackson. William refused treatment until his brother was seen to kept saying something about an oath they'd made." Grace's eyes grew distant. "I've never seen Jackson work with such determination. Hours he spent, delicate work in terrible conditions. He managed to extract the bullet, repair what damage he could. Against all odds, Matthew stabilized." "But my father said he died," Eleanor interjected, confusion evident in her voice. "He did," Grace confirmed. "But not immediately, and not from the initial wound. While Jackson was operating, a Confederate artillery shell hit near the hospital. Not a direct hit, but close enough to shower us with debris. A piece of shrapnel struck one of the support beams. In the chaos that followed, Matthew's cot was knocked over. The fall reopened his wounds, and in his weakened state," she shook her head sadly, "he was gone within the hour." Eleanor felt a chill. Did my father know this? That Uncle Matthew survived the surgery? He knew Jackson had saved him initially. Yes, William was there when Matthew regained consciousness briefly. That's when your uncle forgave him for leaving him on the field. Grace hesitated. "What happened next is why I believe Jackson has been avoiding this subject." "Tell me," Eleanor urged, a strange foreboding settling over her. "After Matthew died, William broke. Completely. He attacked Jackson, had to be restrained by orderlies. Kept screaming that Jackson had broken the oath too, that he'd promised to save Matthew and failed." Grace's voice softened with sympathy. "Your father was out of his mind with grief, of course. He didn't truly blame Jackson, at least not once he'd calmed down, but by then the damage was done." "What damage?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Jackson had never lost a patient he believed he could save," Grace explained. "Matthew's death, coming after he'd successfully completed the surgery, hit him harder than he let on. He began to doubt himself, his skills. It was the beginning of the darkness that later claimed him when he lost his family to influenza." Eleanor's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile this new information with what she knew of both men. "Does my father remember this?" His attack on Jackson? I don't know, Grace admitted. Many men block out such moments of extreme emotion, especially in war. And with the drinking afterward, she shrugged. It's possible he doesn't recall it clearly, if at all. And Jackson, he recognized my father when I told him my name that first night, didn't he? Grace nodded. I believe so. Jackson doesn't forget a patient or a patient's family, especially not one that affected him so deeply. Yet he took me in anyway, Eleanor marveled. Knowing who I was, who my father was. That's the kind of man he is, Grace said simply. He wouldn't hold the sins of the father against the daughter, especially not one in need. Eleanor's gaze fell on her mother's silver pocket watch still on the bedside table. A new thought occurred to her. Grace, did you know my mother, Eleanor Blackwood? The older woman looked startled. Your mother's name was Eleanor. Yes, I was named for her. Something like recognition dawned in Grace's eyes. I didn't make the connection. Your mother, was she a nurse by any chance? Eleanor nodded, excitement building. Yes, that's what my father told me. She served during the war, which is how they met. Grace sat back in her chair, a strange expression crossing her face. Oh my, she murmured. Well, that explains a great deal. What does it explain? Instead of answering directly, Grace reached for the silver pocket watch. May I? At Eleanor's nod, she picked it up, examining it carefully. I've seen this before, she said quietly, or one very much like it. Eleanor leaned forward eagerly. Where, when? During the war, many of the medical staff carried timepieces necessary for tracking patients' pulses, documenting treatment times. There was a nurse at Gettysburg with a silver watch very similar to this one. Beautiful young woman, skilled beyond her years. My mother, Eleanor breathed. Perhaps, Grace said cautiously. I never knew her full name, we were all so busy, and afterward we scattered to the winds. She handed the watch back to Eleanor. She worked closely with Jackson, though. They made a remarkable team. Eleanor's mind was racing. If her mother had worked with Jackson during the war, had known him before meeting William. I should go, Grace said, suddenly rising to her feet. I've said more than I intended, and perhaps more than I should have. No, please, Eleanor protested. I have so many questions. Grace patted her hand gently. Some questions are better answered by those directly involved, my dear. I've given you pieces, it's up to you to assemble them into a whole. After Grace left, Eleanor lay back against her pillows, mind whirling with possibilities. The connections between Jackson, her father, and possibly her mother seemed to grow more complex with each revelation. What was the full truth that remained hidden, and would uncovering it heal old wounds or create new ones? That evening, Jackson was later than usual in returning from his rounds. When he finally arrived, Eleanor heard him moving about the kitchen, the familiar sounds of someone preparing a simple meal. Valor appeared at her bedroom door, tail wagging in greeting. Come in, boy, she called softly. The dog padded over to her bedside, accepting her scratches behind his ears with evident pleasure. I understand you had a visitor today, Jackson said from the doorway, a tray in his hands. Yes, Grace stopped by, Eleanor replied, watching his face carefully. We had an interesting conversation. Jackson set the tray on her bedside table, a simple meal of stew bread and tea. Did you? Grace is a font of local knowledge. We didn't discuss local matters, Eleanor said. We talked about the war, about Gettysburg. Jackson stilled his back to her as he arranged items on the tray. I see. She told me about my Uncle Matthew. About how you operated on him saved him initially. His shoulders tensed visibly. Grace has a good memory. And about how my father reacted when Uncle Matthew died anyway. Jackson turned to face her, then his expression carefully neutral. The war brought out extreme reactions in many men. Your father had just lost his twin brother. His grief was understandable. Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor asked. When I mentioned my father's name that first night, you recognized it, didn't you? Jackson sighed, the careful mask slipping to reveal genuine weariness. Yes, he admitted. I recognized the Blackwood name. I didn't know if you were related to William at first, but once you confirmed it. You took me in anyway, Eleanor finished for him, despite what happened between you and my father. Your injuries required treatment, Jackson said simply, as if that explained everything. Perhaps for him it did. There's more, isn't there? Eleanor pressed. Grace mentioned my mother was a nurse during the war. She said she carried a silver pocket watch like mine, that she worked closely with you. Jackson's composure faltered momentarily. He moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. Your mother, he said quietly, was one of the finest nurses I ever had the privilege to work with. Skilled, compassionate, unflappable, even in the worst circumstances. You knew her well then. He nodded slowly. We worked together for nearly 2 years through some of the bloodiest battles of the war. He turned to face Eleanor. I didn't make the connection immediately. Blackwood was your father's name, not hers, and Eleanor is not an uncommon name. But you suspected, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. The watch made me wonder, Jackson admitted. And there's something of her in your face, your manner, especially when you're concentrating on a medical text. A strange feeling washed over Eleanor, a mixture of loss for the mother she barely remembered and a newfound connection through Jackson's memories. What was she like? She asked. Really like beyond my father's stories. Jackson's expression softened with reminiscence. Determined, brilliant. She had a natural understanding of medicine that many trained physicians lacked. She could have been a doctor in a more just world. He smiled slightly. She was also stubborn as the day is long and didn't suffer fools gladly. That sounds like my father's description as well, Eleanor said, smiling despite the emotional weight of the conversation. She loved poetry. Jackson continued, warming to the subject. Had Tennyson and Wordsworth memorized, would recite verses while we worked to keep our spirits up. And she had this way of humming when she was deep in thought, completely unconscious of it. Eleanor felt a pang of recognition. I do that too, apparently. Father always said it drove him to distraction. Jackson's smile faded. After Gettysburg, after what happened with Matthew, she was one of the few who didn't look at me differently. She told me. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. She told me that saving lives wasn't about playing God, it was about being his instrument. That sometimes the instrument is perfect, but the composition changes anyway. That sounds like the inscription, Eleanor murmured, picking up the pocket watch. The truth shall set you free. Jackson nodded. One of her favorite sayings. She believed truth was the foundation of healing both for the body and the soul. Eleanor turned the watch over in her hands, feeling as if she were on the verge of understanding something important. What happened to her after the war? How did she meet my father? A shadow passed over Jackson's features. I can't speak to that, he said, his tone becoming more formal. After Gettysburg, we were assigned to different hospitals. I lost track of many colleagues as the war progressed. Eleanor sensed he was withholding something, but before she could press further, Valor suddenly barked, his attention fixed on the window. Jackson moved quickly to look outside. Rider coming, he said, reaching for the rifle he kept near the door. a necessary precaution in the still wild territory. Eleanor strained to hear, catching the distant sound of hoofbeats approaching at speed, not the steady pace of a casual visitor, but the urgent rhythm of emergency. "Stay here," Jackson instructed, grabbing his medical bag as well as the rifle. "Valor, stay with Eleanor." The dog immediately took up position beside her bed, alert and protective. Jackson disappeared down the hallway, and moments later, Eleanor heard the front door open, followed by muffled voices, one Jackson's, the other, unfamiliar and clearly agitated. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone conveyed urgency. Medical emergency, most likely. Jackson received such calls with some regularity, especially as winter approached and accidents became more common among the isolated homesteads. Footsteps approached her room, and Jackson reappeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "I need to go out," he said. "Anderson's boy took a fall from the barn loft, possible head injury, and broken arm." "Of course," Eleanor replied immediately. "Go. Valor and I will be fine." Jackson hesitated. "I may be gone most of the night. The Anderson place is a good hour's ride, and I won't want to move the boy if his injuries are severe." "We'll manage," Eleanor assured him. "Save that child." Something flickered in Jackson's eyes, gratitude perhaps, or recognition of her understanding of his priorities. "We'll continue our conversation when I return," he promised. "There are things you should know, things I should have told you before now." With that cryptic statement, he was gone, leaving Eleanor with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that whatever Jackson had to tell her would change everything. Eleanor found sleep elusive that night. Her mind kept returning to the fragments of information she'd gathered, her father's story of Gettysburg Grace's revelations about Matthew's death, Jackson's memories of her mother. They swirled together like pieces of a puzzle whose final image remained frustratingly unclear. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows with increasing insistence. Montana's weather could change rapidly, especially in autumn, and Eleanor recognized the signs of an approaching storm. She hoped Jackson had reached the Anderson homestead before the worst of it hit. Valor remained vigilant beside her bed, occasionally lifting his head at sounds only his keen ears could detect. His presence was comforting in the empty house, a tangible connection to Jackson even in his absence. Unable to sleep and restless with unanswered questions, Eleanor decided to read. She reached for the small stack of books Jackson had left on her bedside table, medical texts mainly with a few novels interspersed. Her hand hesitated over a leather-bound volume she hadn't noticed before. It looked older than the others, its spine cracked and worn with use. Opening it, she discovered it was a journal, the pages filled with a precise slanting hand she recognized as Jackson's. She should close it. She knew private thoughts were not meant for others' eyes, but a name on the open page caught her attention. Eleanor. Not her name, but her mother's. The entry was dated July 5, 1863, the day after the Battle of Gettysburg concluded. Eleanor insisted on working another shift, despite having been on her feet for nearly 30 hours. Her dedication shames us all. Today she assisted with 17 surgeries, never faltering, even when Lieutenant Blackwood's case went poorly. I find myself increasingly dependent on her steady presence. If there is any light in this hellish place, she is it. Eleanor knew she should stop reading, but the glimpse into her mother's life and Jackson's thoughts about her was too compelling to resist. She turned the page. July 12, 1863. Eleanor finally collapsed from exhaustion today. I ordered her to rest for 12 hours minimum, though I doubt she'll comply. When I checked on her, she was sleeping with her silver watch still clutched in her hand, the one with the inscription about truth. I wonder what truths she seeks in this place of suffering and death. Whatever they are, I hope she finds them. Few deserve peace more than she does. The entries continued documenting the grueling work of the field hospital, the cases that haunted Jackson, the moments of unexpected beauty amidst horror. Throughout Eleanor, her mother appeared regularly, a steady presence in Jackson's professional life, and increasingly it seemed in his personal thoughts as well. August 23, 1863. We received orders today. The hospital is relocating to support the upcoming campaign. Eleanor has been reassigned to a different unit effective immediately. The news struck me harder than I anticipated. I have grown accustomed to her presence, her quiet competence, her occasional smile that transforms her entire face. I gave her my copy of Wordsworth as a parting gift. She gave me her handkerchief, a simple thing, with her initials embroidered in the corner. I shall keep it as a talisman against the darkness I know awaits us all. Eleanor turned the page, but the next entry was dated months later and made no mention of her mother. She flipped forward, scanning for the name, but it appeared only occasionally, usually in passing reference to a technique Eleanor had taught him or a patient they had treated together. Then, in an entry dated June 17, 1865, after the war's end, she found what she was looking for. I encountered William Blackwood in Washington today. He has received a captain's commission and seems much recovered from the loss of his brother. He spoke of Eleanor with such familiarity that I was momentarily confused. It seems they have been corresponding since Gettysburg. She tended to him after Matthew's death, apparently. He asked for my blessing in a roundabout way. I gave it, of course. What right have I to stand in the way of her happiness? The war has taken enough from all of us. If she has found comfort with William, I can only wish them well, though the thought of her as Eleanor Blackwood rather than Eleanor Hayes brings a pain I had not anticipated. Eleanor's hands trembled as she read the passage again. Eleanor Hayes. Her mother's maiden name, a detail her father had never mentioned. And Jackson, he had known her mother not just as a colleague, but as someone he cared for deeply. The final piece clicked into place with stunning clarity. Jackson Montgomery had loved her mother. And based on the entry, it seemed her mother might have had feelings for him as well before ultimately choosing William Blackwood. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind reeling. No wonder Jackson had been so reluctant to discuss her mother, why he had seemed so disturbed by William's visit. The past between these three people was far more complicated than she had imagined. Outside, the wind howled with increasing fury, mirroring the tumult in Eleanor's thoughts. What did this mean for her relationship with Jackson? For the growing feelings she could no longer deny. Was his kindness toward her merely an extension of his feelings for her mother? A way of honoring a woman long dead? The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows, in sheets driven by the gusting wind. Eleanor knew such storms could quickly become dangerous in Montana territory. She hoped fervently that Jackson had reached shelter before the worst hit. Valor suddenly raised his head, ears pricked forward, a low growl building in his throat. Eleanor strained to hear over the storm, catching what might have been the sound of the front door opening. "Jackson," she called, relief washing over her. "Is that you?" No answer came, but footsteps moved through the house, heavier than Jackson's, accompanied by the distinctive scent of whiskey that reached her even before her visitor appeared in the doorway. "Hello, daughter," William Blackwood said, water streaming from his coat onto the wooden floor. "I believe it's time we finished our conversation about the Blackwood curse." Eleanor stared at her father in disbelief, her mind struggling to reconcile his sudden appearance with the storm raging outside. William Blackwood stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, his eyes unnervingly clear, despite the unmistakable smell of whiskey that clung to him. Valor positioned himself between Eleanor and the intruder. His hackles raised a low growl, rumbling in his chest. "Father," Eleanor managed her voice steadier than she felt. "What are you doing here? It's the middle of the night, and there's a storm." William stepped into the room, water pooling around his boots. His gaze fell on the journal still clutched in Eleanor's hands. "Reading about the past, I see." He observed his tone impossible to decipher. Eleanor set the journal aside, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. Dr. Montgomery was called away to attend an injured child. He'll be back soon. She hoped the implied warning would register with her father. William seemed unconcerned moving further into the room despite Valor's increasingly threatening posture. "The Anderson boy, yes. I passed the messenger on my way here." He looked down at the dog with something like recognition. "Military animal isn't he? I knew his kind in the war. Loyal to a fault." "Father, you're not making sense," Eleanor said carefully. "You said you wanted to discuss the curse, but you told me last week you no longer believed in it." William laughed, a hollow sound that raised goosebumps on Eleanor's arms. "I said many things last week. Played the repentant sinner, the broken man seeking redemption." He moved to the window, staring out at the storm, as if searching for something in the darkness. "It was a performance worthy of the theater, wasn't it?" Alarm bells rang in Eleanor's mind. This was not the clear-eyed, remorseful man who had visited her a week ago. This was someone else entirely, or perhaps the same man with a different mask. "Why are you really here?" she asked, her hand discreetly moving toward the drawer where she knew Jackson kept a small revolver. William turned from the window, his face suddenly sad. "I came for you, Eleanor, to take you home." "I'm not well enough to travel," she replied, her fingers closing around the drawer pull. "Dr. Montgomery says I need at least another month of recovery." "Dr. Montgomery," William repeated, his expression darkening. Always Dr. Montgomery, the great surgeon, the miracle worker. He spat the words like poison. "Did he tell you, Eleanor? Did he tell you how he failed to save Matthew? How he promised he could do it, then let my brother die on his table?" Eleanor's hand stilled on the drawer. "Grace told me what happened. It was an accident. An artillery shell hit near the hospital. Uncle Matthew's cot was knocked over." William waved a dismissive hand. "Excuses. He should have saved him. That was his oath, his sacred duty." His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Just as it was mine to protect Matthew on the field. We both failed. We both broke our oaths." "Father, please," Eleanor said, recognizing the dangerous territory they were entering. "You're not thinking clearly. Let me get you some dry clothes, some coffee." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in years," William interrupted. "Do you know what I found in town today? Old newspapers from back east. There was an article about an epidemic in Boston in '69. Influenza. Killed hundreds." His eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Including the family of a prominent surgeon, one Dr. Jackson Montgomery." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Don't you see?" William approached the bed, his movements unnervingly deliberate. "The curse followed him too. He failed to save Matthew, and in return he lost his own family. An eye for an eye, a life for a life." "That's not how the world works," Eleanor said firmly. "Tragedy isn't divine punishment. It's just life." William stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You sound like your mother," he murmured. "She never believed in the curse either. Always said I was giving power to superstition." A shadow crossed his face. "But she died anyway, didn't she? Just like every Blackwood wife before her." Eleanor felt a surge of frustration break through her fear. Mother died of childbed fever, a common complication of birth in those days. Many women died that way. It wasn't a curse, Father. It was medical reality. Medical reality, William echoed bitterly. Is that what Montgomery has been teaching you? Cold clinical facts to explain away the hand of fate. He leaned closer, his breath sour with whiskey. Did he tell you about your mother, about their time together during the war? Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. He mentioned they worked together, yes. William's laugh held no humor. Worked together, a polite way of putting it. He straightened, adjusting his sodden coat with a military precision that seemed at odds with his disheveled appearance. I knew, you see. I always knew he loved her, just as I knew she had feelings for him before she chose me. Why did she choose you? Eleanor asked quietly, genuinely curious, despite the dangerous situation. William's expression softened momentarily. She said I needed her more, that Jackson was strong enough to walk his path alone, but I would be lost without her compass. His voice broke slightly. She was right, of course. When she died, I lost my way completely. For a brief moment, Eleanor glimpsed the heartbroken man beneath the angry exterior, the husband who had lost his wife, the father who had failed his child. But the moment passed quickly, the hardness returning to his eyes. Get dressed, he commanded, his tone shifting back to military authority. I've got a wagon outside. We're leaving. Valor growled louder, sensing the escalating tension. I can't travel, Father, Eleanor said firmly. My legs are still healing. Besides, you told me you sold the ranch. Where would we go? Away from here, away from him. William's gaze fell on the silver pocket watch on the bedside table. With surprising gentleness, he picked it up, running his thumb over the inscription. She gave this to me as she was dying, you know. Said to give it to you when you were old enough to understand the truth it contained. What truth? Eleanor asked, hoping to keep him talking until she could formulate a plan. William opened the watch, his finger tracing the inside of the case, as if searching for something. The truth about oaths and how breaking them carries consequences across generations. He closed the watch with a decisive snap. The truth about love and how it blinds us to reality. He placed the watch in his pocket rather than returning it to the table, a small act of possession that troubled Eleanor deeply. Father, please, she tried again. You're not well. Let me help you. Help me. William's voice rose sharply. Like Montgomery helped Matthew. Like he helped your mother. Eleanor frowned in confusion. What do you mean Mother died years after the war, after Jackson had already left for Boston? William's expression twisted. Another of his convenient truths. Your mother wrote to him when complications arose after your birth. Begged him to come. He never responded. That can't be true, Eleanor protested. He wouldn't ignore such a plea. The great Dr. Montgomery was too busy with his prestigious Boston practice to help a former nurse in the Montana Territory. William spat. By the time the local doctor arrived, it was too late. She was gone. Eleanor shook her head, unwilling to believe Jackson could have abandoned her mother in such dire need. There must be some explanation. Letters get lost, especially out here. Always defending him, William muttered. Just like her. His voice hardened. Enough talk. We're leaving now. He moved toward Eleanor, clearly intending to force the issue. Valor lunged forward, teeth bared, but with surprising speed William sidestepped the dog's attack and drew a pistol from beneath his coat. Call off your guardian, he ordered, the gun trained steadily on Valor. I don't want to shoot him, but I will if necessary. Valor back, Eleanor commanded, heart racing. The dog reluctantly retreated to her side, still growling. "Father, please put the gun away. This isn't you. This is the whiskey talking." "I've had exactly 2 drinks tonight," William replied, his hand perfectly steady on the weapon. "Enough to quiet the ghosts, not enough to cloud my judgment. Now I'm going to help you to the wagon, and we're going to leave this place." "I can't walk," Eleanor reminded him, desperation creeping into her voice. "I'll carry you if I must." "Stop this madness, William." The new voice came from the doorway, deep, authoritative, and unmistakably Jackson's. He stood there drenched from the storm, his medical bag still in one hand. His eyes took in the scene with one sweeping glance, William with the gun, valor in protective stance, Eleanor's frightened face. "Montgomery," William acknowledged without turning. "Right on time for the reunion." "Put the gun down," Jackson said calmly, setting his bag aside. "You don't want to do this." William finally turned to face him, the pistol now trained on Jackson instead of valor. "Actually, I've wanted to do this for a very long time." The 2 men stared at each other across the room, former colleagues, rivals in love, and now adversaries in a conflict Eleanor was only beginning to understand. "You let Matthew die," William said, his voice surprisingly steady. "You let Eleanor die. You broke your oaths as a physician, and now you're trying to take my daughter too." "No one is taking anyone," Jackson replied, his tone reasonable despite the gun pointed at his chest. "Eleanor is my patient, nothing more. She needs medical care you can't provide at present." "Patient?" William scoffed. "Is that what you called her mother too before you abandoned her when she needed you most?" A flicker of confusion crossed Jackson's face. "I never abandoned Eleanor Hayes. After the war, she chose to marry you. I respected her decision." "Not then," William snapped. "Later, when she was dying, she wrote to you, begged you to come save her. You never even replied." Jackson's expression shifted from confusion to shock. "What are you talking about? I never received any letter from Eleanor after she left with you for Montana." "Liar." William's hand tightened on the gun. "It's the truth," Jackson insisted. "Had I known she was in danger, nothing would have kept me from her side. Nothing." Something in his voice, raw sincerity perhaps, or the depth of emotion it contained, seemed to reach William. His gun hand trembled slightly. "She died calling your name," he said, pain etching every word. "Not mine. Yours." The revelation hung in the air between them, a shared agony that transcended their differences. For a moment, they were simply 2 men who had loved and lost the same remarkable woman. "I'm sorry, William," Jackson said softly. "Truly I am. For Matthew, for Eleanor, for all of it. But this," he gestured at the gun, "this won't bring either of them back. It will only cause more pain." William's resolve seemed to waver. "The curse—" "There is no curse," Jackson interrupted gently. "Only the terrible randomness of life and death. We've both seen enough of both to know that." "Then why?" William demanded, genuine anguish breaking through his anger. "Why did they both die? Why did everyone I love slip away?" "I don't know," Jackson admitted. "I've asked myself the same question every day since losing Charlotte and my children. There's no answer that satisfies, no explanation that heals the wound completely." Slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements, Jackson approached William. "What I do know is that you haven't lost everyone. Eleanor, your daughter, is right here. She's alive, she's healing, and she needs her father. Not the captain, not the grieving widower, but the father who once loved her enough to name her after her mother." William's gaze shifted to Eleanor, and for a brief moment, She saw recognition in his eyes, the same look he had given her when she was a child, and he had been briefly the father she needed. She has her mother's eyes, he murmured, the gun lowering fractionally. Yes, she does, Jackson agreed. And her spirit, too. Don't let the curse claim another victim, William. Not when that victim is your own flesh and blood. For a heartbeat, it seemed Jackson's words had reached him. The gun lowered further, William's shoulders slumping as if a great weight were settling upon them. Then his expression hardened once more. No, he said, raising the pistol again. No more lies. The curse is real, and it ends tonight. What happened next unfolded with the terrible clarity of moments forever etched in memory. William turned the gun not toward Jackson or Eleanor, but toward himself. Jackson lunged forward, reaching for the weapon. Valor, sensing the shift in tension, leapt as well. The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the bedroom. For a moment, time seemed suspended, three figures frozen in a tableau of intervention. Then William collapsed, blood blossoming on his shirt, not from self-infliction, but from where the bullet had struck his shoulder when Jackson knocked his arm upward. "Father!" Eleanor cried, struggling to rise from the bed despite her injured legs. Jackson was already kneeling beside William, his doctor's instincts overriding all else. The bullet went through clean, he assessed quickly. Valor, watch him. The dog immediately positioned himself near William's head, alert, but no longer aggressive. Jackson moved swiftly to retrieve his medical bag, returning to begin treatment with the same efficiency Eleanor had observed in his care for her. "Eleanor, I need clean towels and hot water if possible," he instructed, cutting away William's bloodied shirt. Despite her limited mobility, Eleanor managed to reach the basin and towels kept on her bedside table for her own care. She passed them to Jackson, watching as he worked to stem the bleeding. "Will he live?" she asked, her voice small. "Yes," Jackson assured her, not looking up from his work. "The wound is serious, but not life-threatening if infection is prevented." William's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as awareness returned. He looked at Jackson, bent over him, then at Eleanor, watching anxiously from the bed. "I failed again," he murmured. "Can't even die properly." "That's because you're not meant to die yet," Jackson told him firmly, applying pressure to the wound. "You have too much living left to do." William's gaze drifted to Eleanor. "I'm sorry," he whispered, "for everything. For believing in ghosts and curses instead of loving what was right in front of me." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. "I know, Father." "The watch," William said suddenly, his good hand fumbling at his pocket. "Your mother's watch. You should have it." Jackson retrieved the silver timepiece, placing it in Eleanor's hands. "Keep it safe," William urged. "The truth. It's important." Eleanor nodded, clutching the watch tightly as Jackson continued to work on her father's wound. Outside, the storm began to abate, the howling wind gradually softening to a gentle patter of rain against the windows. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. Eleanor sat by her father's bedside, watching his chest rise and fall in the steady rhythm of drugged sleep. Jackson had given him laudanum for the pain after treating and bandaging the wound. "He'll sleep for several hours," Jackson said, appearing in the doorway with 2 steaming cups of coffee. He handed one to Eleanor. "You should rest too. It's been a long night." Eleanor accepted the coffee, gratefully inhaling its rich aroma. "I don't think I could sleep now if I tried." Jackson pulled a chair beside hers, his movements betraying his own exhaustion. He'd been up all night, first with the Anderson boy, then dealing with William's injury. "How is the child?" Eleanor asked suddenly, remembering the original reason for Jackson's absence. "He'll recover," Jackson replied. "Broken arm and a concussion, but children are resilient. The Anderson family sends their thanks for your concern." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both watching William's sleeping form. "He truly believed you received a letter from my mother," Eleanor finally said. "When she was dying." Jackson's face grew somber. "I never did. Had I known she was in danger." He trailed off the rest of the sentence unnecessary. "I believe you," Eleanor assured him, "just as I believe he thought he sent it. Perhaps he wrote it but never mailed it. Or perhaps it was lost along the way. The postal service to remote territories wasn't reliable then." "Perhaps," Jackson agreed, though his expression suggested he had his doubts. Eleanor turned her mother's pocket watch over in her hands, studying the familiar inscription. "The truth shall set you free," she murmured. "What truth, I wonder? What freedom?" Jackson watched her with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "Have you opened the case?" he asked. "Of course, many times." "No, I mean—" He gently took the watch from her hands. "Have you examined it closely? The case itself?" Eleanor frowned slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." Instead of explaining, Jackson carefully pried at the edge of the inner case with his thumbnail. To Eleanor's surprise, a thin silver plate separated from the back of the watch a secret compartment she had never known existed. "How did you know?" she breathed. "Many ladies' watches of that era had hidden compartments for keepsakes," Jackson explained. "Your mother once showed me hers, though, not what she kept inside." From the compartment, he extracted a small folded piece of paper yellowed with age, but preserved by its silver cocoon. With infinite care, he unfolded it and handed it to Eleanor. The handwriting was delicate yet firm, a woman's hand, educated and precise. Eleanor recognized it immediately from the few samples of her mother's writing she had seen over the years. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have discovered the secret of the watch. I write these words as you sleep beside me, just days old and perfect in every way. There is a truth you must know, one your father may never be able to tell you. You are a child of love, deep abiding love, but your father's heart is wounded by war and loss. He believes in a curse that does not exist, sees doom where there is only the natural flow of life and death. The true curse is fear, fear that prevents us from living fully, from loving completely. Do not let fear rule your life as it has ruled his. Find your path, follow your heart, and know that I am with you always." The watch belonged to Jackson Montgomery before he gave it to me. The inscription was his reminder to me that acknowledging truth, however painful, is the first step toward healing. I pass this reminder to you now. With all my love, Eleanor Hayes, Blackwood. Tears flowed freely down Eleanor's cheeks as she read and reread the letter. Her mother's voice seemed to speak directly to her across the years, offering both wisdom and permission to chart her own course. "She knew," Eleanor whispered. "She knew she might die, and she prepared this message for me." "Your mother always prepared for every contingency," Jackson said softly. "It was what made her an exceptional nurse." Eleanor carefully refolded the letter. "She says the watch was yours originally." Jackson nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "A gift from my father when I graduated medical school. I gave it to her at Gettysburg after a particularly difficult surgery. She had kept perfect time for me, counting pulse beats while I operated. I told her she needed it more than I did." And the inscription. Something she often said to me when I was troubled by cases I couldn't solve. That facing the truth, The limitations of medicine, the reality of death, was the only way to find peace with my calling. His gaze returned to Eleanor's face. She was right, of course. She usually was. Eleanor looked at her sleeping father, then back at Jackson. "Did you love her?" she asked directly. Jackson didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said simply. "But she chose William, and I respected her choice. She believed she could heal him, and perhaps she would have given time. And now," Eleanor pressed her heart hammering in her chest. "When you look at me, do you see her? Is that why you've been so kind, so generous with your time and knowledge?" Jackson reached out gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. "When I first found you at the crossroads, perhaps there was an echo of her in my response," he admitted. "But since then—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Since then, I've come to know you, Eleanor, not as your mother's daughter, but as yourself, a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and compassion. My feelings for you are entirely your own." "Feelings," Eleanor echoed, hardly daring to hope she understood his meaning. "Inappropriate ones, perhaps, given our circumstances," Jackson said with a rueful smile. "You're my patient significantly younger and—" He glanced at William. "There's a complicated history here that can't be ignored." "I'm nearly 20, Eleanor pointed out, "old enough to know my own mind. And while I may be your patient now, I won't always be." Jackson's expression grew serious. "Eleanor, I'm 45 years old. I can't give you children. I live a solitary life in a remote territory. What future could I possibly offer you?" "A future of my own choosing," she replied firmly. "One with purpose and meaning. One where I could continue learning medicine, perhaps even practice alongside you." She reached for his hand. "One with love, Jackson. Real love, not fear disguised as protection." He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. "You deserve so much more than I can give." "Let me decide what I deserve," Eleanor said softly. "Isn't that what freedom means? The freedom my mother wanted for me." Before Jackson could respond, William stirred a soft groan escaping his lips as consciousness returned. Eleanor reluctantly released Jackson's hand as her father's eyes fluttered open. "Eleanor," William called weakly. "Are you there?" "I'm here, Father," she assured him, moving closer to his side. William's gaze shifted between her and Jackson, comprehension gradually returning to his eyes. "I remember now," he said, his voice rough with pain. "I tried to. I wanted to end it. The curse." "There is no curse," Eleanor said gently. "Only choices and their consequences." William's eyes filled with tears. "I've made so many wrong choices." "We all have," Jackson interjected quietly. "The question is whether we're willing to make better ones going forward." William regarded him for a long moment. "You saved me," he finally said. "Again, despite everything." "It's what I do," Jackson replied simply. "I never sent it." William confessed suddenly, his gaze returning to Eleanor. "Your mother's letter to Montgomery. I wrote it for her when she was too weak to hold a pen, but I couldn't bear the thought of him coming, of seeing her call his name instead of mine, so I kept it." A tear tracked down his weathered cheek. Another choice. Another consequence. Eleanor took his hand, feeling the frailty beneath the calloused skin. "Mother left me a letter," she told him. "In the watch. She knew you were wounded by war and loss. She understood Father, and she loved you anyway." William closed his eyes, more tears escaping. "I didn't deserve her." "Perhaps not," Eleanor agreed softly. "But she chose you nonetheless. Honor that choice by becoming the man she believed you could be. William nodded, weakly, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. I'll try, he whispered. For her. For you. Rest now, Jackson instructed, checking William's bandage. Your body needs time to heal. As William drifted back to sleep, Eleanor and Jackson moved to the doorway, speaking in hushed tones. He'll need careful monitoring for infection, Jackson said, and someone to help him when he's well enough to leave. I'll take care of him, Eleanor promised, once my own legs have healed enough. Jackson studied her face. Are you certain, after everything? He's my father, she said simply. Broken and flawed, but still my family. I won't abandon him. A look of profound admiration crossed Jackson's features. You are extraordinary, Eleanor Blackwood. Thank you, she replied, but I'm merely following the example set by the remarkable people in my life, my mother Grace and you. Jackson hesitated, then said, There's something I've been meaning to ask you, something I've been considering for some time. Yes, Eleanor prompted when he paused. I've been thinking of taking on an apprentice, he continued. Someone to learn medicine properly, to perhaps carry on my practice someday. Grace has been urging me to do so for years. Eleanor's heart leapt, but she kept her expression neutral. That sounds like a wise decision. I believe I've found the right candidate, Jackson said carefully. Someone with natural talent, keen intelligence, and genuine compassion for others. Someone who has already demonstrated remarkable aptitude despite limited formal education. They sound perfect, Eleanor replied, unable to suppress a small smile. There would be challenges, of course, Jackson continued. The medical establishment is not kind to women who seek to join its ranks. Training would need to be supplemented with correspondence courses from the East. And there would be talk a young woman living and working with a bachelor physician. People always talk, Eleanor said dismissively. What matters is the truth, not rumors. And the truth is, Jackson looked at her intently. The truth is that I want to be a doctor more than anything, Eleanor declared. And I believe we could do extraordinary work together, Jackson Montgomery. A slow smile spread across his face. Then consider this a formal offer of apprenticeship, Miss Blackwood, to begin as soon as your legs are fully healed and your father is well enough to fend for himself. I accept, Eleanor said immediately, joy bubbling up inside her, though I may require some accommodation during my training. What sort of accommodation? Jackson asked, his tone serious, though his eyes sparkled with something like hope. The kind that might eventually lead to a more permanent arrangement, Eleanor replied boldly. If after working together for a suitable period we find our feelings remain consistent. Jackson's smile deepened. A sensible approach, very medical in its methodology. I learned from the best, Eleanor said softly. Their eyes held for a long moment, unspoken promises passing between them. Then, with a nod that acknowledged both professional boundaries and future possibilities, Jackson turned to check on William once more. Eleanor moved to the window, watching as the morning sun illuminated the landscape. Montana stretched before her, vast, challenging, and beautiful in its wildness. Like her own future, it held both promise and uncertainty. In her hand, she clutched her mother's pocket watch, the hidden letter safely tucked inside its secret compartment. The truth shall set you free, she whispered, understanding at last what freedom her mother had wished for her. Not just freedom from fear or superstition, but freedom to choose her own path to love without reservation, to heal others while healing herself. Egg. Spring came to Montana with its characteristic drama snow, one day, wildflowers the next. 6 months had passed since the night of the storm, bringing changes as profound as the turning of the seasons. Eleanor stood on the porch of Jackson's ranch house, their ranch house now watching as William secured the last of his belongings to his horse. Her legs had healed well, though the right one still occasionally ached before rain. Jackson's prognosis had been correct. She walked with only the slightest hint of a limp, noticeable mainly when she was tired. William had recovered more slowly, his shoulder wound complicated by a mild infection that had lingered for weeks. During his convalescence, Eleanor had watched a transformation in her father, gradual at first, then increasingly evident as the poison of whiskey and false beliefs left his system. "Are you certain about this journey?" she asked as he approached the porch. "Denver is a long way." William nodded, adjusting his hat against the bright spring sunshine. "Dr. Miller's cousin needs a stable manager. It's good honest work with no temptations." He looked up at the house behind her. "Besides, you don't need me underfoot while you're studying." Over the winter, Eleanor had begun her formal medical apprenticeship with Jackson. The arrangement had raised eyebrows in town initially, but Grace's endorsement and Eleanor's obvious dedication had gradually silenced the most persistent gossips. She was now enrolled in a correspondence course with a progressive medical college in Philadelphia, supplementing Jackson's practical teaching with theoretical knowledge. "You're never underfoot," Eleanor assured her father. "This is your home too for as long as you want it." William shook his head. "No, this is your home now, yours and Montgomery's. I need to find my own way, Eleanor, just as your mother wanted you to find yours." Eleanor descended the porch steps to embrace him. "Write to me," she instructed, "and visit when you can." "I will," he promised, returning the embrace awkwardly but sincerely. "Be happy, daughter. Live the life she would have wanted for you." As William mounted his horse, Valor appeared from around the house, followed by Jackson. The dog approached William without his former suspicion, accepting a pat on the head before moving to Eleanor's side. "Safe travels, William," Jackson said, extending his hand. William hesitated only briefly before shaking it. "Take care of her, Montgomery." "Always," Jackson promised. "Though as you well know, she's quite capable of taking care of herself." A ghost of a smile touched William's lips. "Like her mother in that respect." He tipped his hat to them both. "Until next time." They watched him ride away, his figure gradually diminishing against the vast Montana sky. When he had disappeared from view, Jackson turned to Eleanor. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "Yes, he needs this a chance to rebuild his life away from memories and old patterns." Jackson slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her close. Over the months of Eleanor's recovery and apprenticeship, their relationship had evolved with deliberate care, professional during working hours, increasingly personal during evenings spent by the fire discussing cases, sharing books, and gradually revealing the deeper parts of themselves to each other. "I have something for you," Jackson said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small box, offering it to her with uncharacteristic hesitation. Eleanor opened it to find a simple gold ring with a modest diamond, elegant and practical, much like the man who had chosen it. "I know we agreed to wait until your training was further along," Jackson said, his voice betraying rare nervousness. "But recent events have reminded me that life is unpredictable and often shorter than we hope. I don't want to waste any more time, Eleanor." He took her hand, his eyes holding hers with the same intensity she had come to treasure. "I love you not as an echo of the past, but as the promise of a future I never thought I'd have again. Will you marry me? Be my partner in life and in healing." Eleanor felt tears of joy welling in her eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." As Jackson slipped the ring onto her finger, Valor barked his apparent approval, making them both laugh. The morning sun caught the diamond, sending prisms of light dancing across their joined hands, a fitting symbol for the brightness they had found together after so much darkness. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular hues, Eleanor held her mother's pocket watch, now a cherished link to both her past and her future. "What are you thinking?" Jackson asked, his hand warm around hers. Eleanor smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "That there never was a curse, only the choices we make and the courage to face their consequences." "Your mother would be proud of you," Jackson said softly. "As am I." "I think she would be proud of all of us," Eleanor replied, "for finding our way back to truth and through it to freedom." As twilight settled over the land, Valor curled at their feet, a peaceful guardian of their hard-won happiness. The silver pocket watch rested in Eleanor's palm, its inscription catching the last light of day. "The truth shall set you free." And so it had. The end.